I'm Marianne Shuko. I'm a co-founder and manager for AlzAuthors. We're the global community of authors writing about Alzheimer's and dementia from personal experience to light the way for others. And we welcome you to Dementia Care Around the World, Part 1. Thank you for sharing your precious time with us. I'd like to introduce some of the members of our management team who are here with us today. Vicky Tapia, who's from Montana, and Ann Campanella, who is from North Carolina, and Jean Lee, who is joining us. Hi, Jean. Jean is from Ohio. Now, we recently launched our custom caregiver collections. You may have seen the news, and both Jean and Ann are instrumental in operating that program. So I just wanted to give a shout out to them and to let you know that you can learn more about the custom caregiver collections on our website at AlzAuthors.com. So I should mention that I am from New York. So since we're talking about being around the world, well, everybody can maybe in the chat write where you're coming from. That would be really helpful so we can all see that we really are a global organization. So in this presentation, we're going to explore with our guest panelists the similarities and differences that caregivers and those living with dementia encounter as they seek care and search for solutions to the many questions and problems that a dementia diagnosis brings. And the authors featured represent the United States and Canada. And we're still hoping our representative from Costa Rica makes it. So as soon as she shows up, we'll let her in. We hope their stories will inspire and empower you on your own dementia journey. We have a lot to learn from each other. Some of the topics we want to cover today is what happens when you attempt to obtain a diagnosis or access care for your loved one. What about community resources? What do you have where you are? What are the primary financial concerns in dementia care? Insurance considerations. We know that the insurance situation in the United States and Canada are very different. What about acquiring home care or moving into assisted living or long-term or memory care? How does that work? And we want to talk about the stigma that surrounds a dementia diagnosis as well. But I have some housekeeping first. Please write your name and where you are from in the chat box if you haven't already. This event is being recorded and it will be posted to our YouTube channel. So if you do not want to be seen, please turn off your camera. We will also post a replay to our podcast, which will not be video. All the participants are muted. If you want to speak, please leave a message in the chat box or raise your hand. All the registrants were encouraged to submit questions for our panelists, and we will ask as many of these questions as we can in the allotted time. So we have three with us now, two distinguished panelists this afternoon, and rather than me introduce them, I'll have them introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about, who they are, where they are, and how they came into dementia care. And we'll start with Cindy.
Thank you, Marianne. Thank you, Alzheimer's Authors, for this opportunity. Really honored to be part of what I heard from Marianne is a group of 300 people who have written books about dementia. And so with that, I'll just give a brief introduction. My name is Cindy Weinstein. I'm an English professor at the California Institute of Technology, which is in Pasadena, California. And I am here because I wrote a book about my father's early onset Alzheimer's. And that my father was diagnosed many years ago. He died many years ago. It took me a long time to write the book, and I can talk more about that at some point. And I have been working hard to share the book with readers because I think it's helpful to hear about a grief process that is ongoing for decades. And I wrote the book with a neurologist named Dr. Bruce Miller. The book's called Finding the Right Words. And it's a dual memoir. And one of the other reasons I want to share the book with as many readers as I can is that Bruce is an extraordinary neurologist and clinician. And the book is a kind of conversation between the two of us. And his contribution, I think, is just so valuable from the point of view of equity and access. Not everyone can get to UCSF for diagnosis and to learn about dementia. And Bruce is able to write about brain health in a way that even I, an English professor who knows very little about neurology, even though she studied it for a year, but even I can understand it. And so I think his contribution to the book is invaluable. I'll stop there.
Maybe start the discussion regarding stigma, because I think that's one of the most important topics regarding an Alzheimer's dementia diagnosis. I think that my observations and being involved, deeply in this world since the early 2000s is that we're finally kind of breaking through that stigma where more and more people are sharing stories and more people are willing to discuss their dementia journey. So I just wanted to see how different people's perspectives are from where they live. And if you have a comment and you would like to add to the discussion, you can also raise your hand. But Cindy, why don't we start with you? Where you are out in California, what are your observations regarding the stigma?
I think you're right that we're starting to undermine stigma. I think that's really, really true. And one of the things that I find so interesting, I'm kind of a newbie to social media. And as an English professor, I'm what's called like a close reader, right? So like I'm constantly reading books and reading images. And one of the things that's always struck me about dementia and stigma is the images that you see of people that are put out by assisted living places. And this is sort of like a new observation for me. Maybe many of you in the room have already thought of this. But the other day I was like looking at this image of this couple and I didn't know which one had dementia.
Mhm.
And part of me thought, well, maybe that's good, because just because you have dementia doesn't mean that, you can't be well put together and sort of fit in with what we think of as the norm and how people should look. But then like another part of me was like, okay, if you're going to show someone with dementia, show the person with dementia. And it's kind of a sort of, it's not like one size fits all, but I think that even though we are sort of cutting through stigma, there's a stigma about representing the full range of what dementia can look like. And I remember there was this woman wrote this really beautiful piece in the New York Times about her mother who had dementia, and she showed a picture of sort of the end part of dementia. And it blew my mind because I had seen so few images like that. And I thought we need more of that to really get it. Like, so, I mean, it's just interesting to think about just sort of visual representations of dementia and how they either contribute to stigma or take away from stigma. So that's just sort of one observation I have. I write about stigma in the book a little bit, and this was, many years ago, and how my father used to play golf, and then the invitations to play golf dried up. And my mother didn't know why and a friend told her that the men who played golf with my dad just couldn't take it anymore, and they, I think, kind of thought dementia was contagious.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and if they got too close to it, like it might rub off or something. Like there was fear, and I think um, we're starting to chip away at that, but I think it's still there. So those are just some just general
Mm-hmm.
observations.
Mm-hmm. Did anybody else have something to add to the question of stigma? Is it something that you've been thinking about or that you've encountered or observed, or any ideas on how we can try to break that down? I know that when you see, like Cindy had mentioned, when you see advertisements for people, like that are in assisted living and memory care and things like that, they usually show people who are in the early stages. And I know when I was starting my very first job in nursing, I interviewed at a long-term care facility and got a tour of the building. And there were 3 stories. And I asked what's on the 3rd story. And she said, well, we're not going to go up there. That's where the patients with dementia are, but we don't take the tour up there. So right away from there, there was a stigma associated with that. Which, to make a long story short, that ended up being like my favorite place to work, was on the 3rd floor. So that was an experience, but people, they kind of want to tend to hide those people away, I suppose. Maybe it's good for them. I don't know. There's also the question of sharing photos of people who have dementia or like end stage, and they no longer can give consent to have their photograph taken or disseminated. So there's ethical issues regarding that, which is a subject that I'm going to be exploring with a panel coming up soon. And that is really interesting. Now, one of our authors, her name is Lauren Dykovitz, she published on her website or on her social media a photo array of her mother over the course of her 10 years of illness, showing the changes on early onset Alzheimer's from when she was diagnosed, and I think she was in her 50s until she passed away. And when you see that, you can really see the changes that occurred to this person. She no longer even resembled herself anymore.
I also just wanted to say one thing that I noticed. I forget the name of the person, but she's created. It's kind of like if you're allergic or you're diabetic, you have like a bracelet that
Mm-hmm.
tells people that that's what you have. And this person, I forget if it's like a almost like a business card or like a.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it was a jewelry item, but it tells people that the person has dementia. And my God, like it's so sort of simple, but such a beautiful idea, I think. I mean, of course, to your point, Marianne, I mean, some people don't want to share it, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
they want to keep the diagnosis to
Mm-hmm.
themselves. That's certainly fair enough. Um, but I think that from the perspective of a caregiver, and if the person with dementia agrees, it can be really, really helpful. And just like puts people on notice, like if this person doesn't react the way you expect them to react or what have you, like this is why. And it's just a fact. And I just think that like I said, it's just such a simple thing, but the simple things are often the most profound.
Yes.
And I just think that the impact could be enormous and also incredibly helpful insofar as getting at stigma.
Yeah. Donna, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I think, I think part of the issue with stigma is the way that we assess human worth and human value and human personhood. I think has a lot to do with the capacity for what philosophers might call practical reason. So if you lose your mind, literally, if you lose your memory, you lose your sense of self. We don't value, um, you know, people who have cognitive impairments, and I I think that this is something that uh, we need to push back on as a group of people who love um, relatives, have loved ones with cognitive impairments. We need to champion their human worth and their personhood. Um, and I think that that's one of the most important things that we can do as activists. Um, I really do, because I think, I look at the ageism and the ableism that exists in the healthcare system, in neighborhoods, even in extended families when people get the diagnosis of Alzheimer's or dementia. And it's terrible. So I think one of the wonderful things that this group does is talk about the people behind the diagnoses. These are people who are worthy of love.
Yes, you said
Say
that so
something?
well.
Can I say something?
Yes.
This is Ethelle Lord speaking. Actually, dementia is a gift that we have yet to unwrap. Once we unwrap it, many people will be surprised. I unwrapped it, so I know I'll be writing a book about that.
Mhm.
The fact that they have no judgment. And I discovered that early because I took my husband out, and there was another lady that had dementia, and her son just sat her down, and I said, let's go see her, to my husband. My husband liked to laugh and liked jokes. So I had written a joke for him because he couldn't really come up with the right words, but he could read it. And he read it to that lady. It was very funny, but she didn't laugh. And you know what? He didn't judge her.
Mhm.
He just moved on. It's a gift. It's a true gift. I followed that now for 21 years. I have a whole book, notes to write about it. And I can tell you, I learned so much by unwrapping that gift.
Oh,
That's all I wanted to say.
that's great. Thank you for sharing. And you're right. And because in so many ways, there are a lot of lessons to learn from dementia. One is about, how we relate to other people and how we use our time is also important. So, in many ways, I believe it is a gift.
And they're also human to the end. We have
Exactly.
to remember that, and they have their own personality to the end of life.
Yep, it's true. So let's move on because we're going to be short on time. We did want to talk about some of the more practical aspects in dementia care, which first would be like medical care and obtaining a diagnosis. So I know that for many families, many of the authors have gone on really years-long journeys sometime just trying to find out like what is going on here. What is the diagnosis? Some people will say it doesn't matter. There's another attitude, doesn't really matter what the diagnosis is because you can't fix it. And, it is what it is. But in the United States, usually I had to do this with my stepfather. We went through a very lengthy process. Although the doctor told me I had to get a second doctor because the doctor they had wasn't helping. So I brought my stepfather to another doctor, and on the very first visit, she told me he has dementia and he needs to be in memory care, which like really floored us. And then after that, she set out to prove it. So then he had to undergo the different tests that are done for people with dementia. And I mean, it ended up in a nasty hospitalization, and finally he was placed. But can you share your experience, Cindy, on obtaining a diagnosis and what you've observed, through your studies and through your work with Dr. Bruce?
Yeah. There's a lot to say about this. I guess I would just first refer to something I write about in the book. Years before my father was sick years before he lost words and spatial disorientation. He was in what I learned is called the prodromal phase of the disease, where basically what's happening is the disease is percolating. And that can be sort of decades before it actually presents. My mother noticed that my father was having trouble hearing, and she brought him to a hearing doctor, and his hearing was quote unquote fine. At which point the hearing doctor turned to my mother and said, how long have you been married? My mother said decades, and the doctor said he just doesn't want to listen to you anymore. So I told Bruce that story when I was studying neurology. This was in the 70s. I see Vicky. Yeah. Betty Friedan, Germaine Greer, you know, the sweet spot of first wave feminism. Anyway, I told Bruce the story when I went to UCSF to study neurology in this interdisciplinary program, and he was like, that needs to go into the book. And so that became the kind of centerpiece of the first chapter on diagnosis. And the other thing is, when my dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and you know, things have really changed since then. Everyone with a memory issue had Alzheimer's, right? So all of these precision diagnoses that we now have were unavailable. So one of the greatest gifts Bruce gave to me, and I hear what you're saying about Marianne, like, you know, like what's the point of a diagnosis? But I don't know, for me, there was like this huge moment of, oh my God, that's what it was. Mm-hmm. So, you know, in the 80s, Dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. I talked to Bruce, and he didn't have any pets. He didn't have any MRIs or anything. All he had was my stories and my dad's age. And he said, well, Cindy, what your father really had was early onset, which means 65 or younger. My dad was in his 50s. Early onset with the logopenic variant, which is a kind of rarer form. It's word finding. So it's not the hippocampus that's getting attacked right away and all the memory stuff that I think many of us associate with Alzheimer's, the repeated stories, not knowing what you had for dinner, that sort of thing. It was really word finding. That was like the first casualty. And, you know, like I said, it was a gift to get that diagnosis and put a lot of things in place for me. And I think that from the point of view of neurologists, having these precision diagnoses is incredibly important, because if doctors can figure out like where in the brain the first cell goes rogue, the opportunity to do research and scientific intervention is that much greater.
Okay, that's a lot of great insight. Okay, does anybody else have any kind of an experience that they would want to share, good or bad, on obtaining a diagnosis? I know one of the problems people often report is they're told, you know, you have dementia, or your mother has dementia, and then we'll see you in a year. And people are not given any type of information or resources so they can figure out, well, what do we do now? Yes, Virginia.
That was really my experience. I was just horrified getting the diagnosis for my mom, because I was in this big highfalutin neurologist office with a big mahogany desk, and my mom and I were sitting there, and he had me fill out a questionnaire. So he kind of looked at it and he said, I see here that you don't think your mother can balance her checkbook any longer. And my mom looked at me and she crossed her arm. This was very beginning MCI. And I thought, well, that's a good way to start. Mm-hmm. He sent us home with a pill pack for Aricept, and that was the last I heard of him.
Wow.
That was not a good beginning.
No, that is not a good beginning. Now our goal is to have them refer people to AlzAuthors, because then they sure to be find information that they need.
Somebody's got to be out there teaching these physicians a little more bedside manner. I'm hoping, since that was 2006, I'm hoping that it has evolved substantially. I hope. I really hope, because it's really tough on family members too. Them
Oh, yeah.
Yes, yes, but you know what I did, Marianne? This is Ethelle Lord again. I actually taught all the physicians. I fired one because she was
Mhm.
not open enough to receive the information.
Yeah.
But the others all said, well, we will learn from you. We want to learn from you. Now then they became my team member. Otherwise, it was impossible. And when we think we can educate the doctors, they think they know pretty well everything. So it's hard to do that. So you have to really confront them and say, you want to be on my team or not. And we're the best ones to teach.
You're right. I had to fire a doctor too. I was their doctor for 15 years and they really liked him. But when I would say, there's something going on here, he was unable and unwilling to pursue it. I mean, all he had to do is give me a referral to a neurologist and send him for a scan. I mean, the other doctor did it with no trouble. But sometimes I think that they get closer to the patient, and then maybe they don't want to see the ugly thing that's lurking.
Dennis, what did you have to say?
Well, my wife was seeing her GP in 2013, a doctor I had confidence in, and he prescribed Aricept for her without doing any serious testing or analysis. We did not get her checked out until we agreed she could retire, which was the wrong decision before getting a diagnosis, because this is a long-term disability. And I continue to share that with people, but I think it's very important as we talk about getting the diagnosis to get it early enough, because that's a time when we could start making change and engage our loved one in all of the necessary information and decisions we have to put forth. And I'm proud of the fact that Nancy participated early on and for as long as she could in the decision-making of her life and the quality of her life. She passed away in January of 2021, but now I really pay it forward and I help people along the way. The whole stigma issue, I thought I wanted to just comment, if I could just go back to that, because that's still a thing that's struggling among many men who share that their wives are not interested in divulging this. They're embarrassed. They don't want people to understand or know that they have a problem. So I'm all in favor of that early diagnosis.
Very good. Very good. Now, let's talk a little bit about resources for dementia care. I guess most of us, I think, are in the United States at this point. So even across the United States, there are variations in care available. For instance, when with my mom, she didn't have dementia, but she required home care services. And I managed to finagle where she lived 24/7 care at home. Well, my mom ended up moving to my brother's house in a different county, and they decided she didn't need any care at all. So I was like, if I knew that my mother would get better if I just moved her over there, I would have done it a long time ago. But the disparities, and this was in Massachusetts, which is Commonwealth and has a very liberal healthcare system. The disparities from like one county to the next were just incredible. So we know that a lot of the care that you can receive is dependent on where you live. So let's talk to Cindy about California, because we know that that's a wealthy state. And do they have a lot of resources there, Cindy?
I don't know, Virginia, maybe you can weigh in on this. I think what I would just say is, like everything else, a lot of this really depends on one's socioeconomic status.
Mhm.
And yes, California is a wealthy state, but there are parts of California that are not. There's the urban rural divide.
Mm-hmm.
And so, access is really
The problem.
complicated and hard. And I think even if you have money, it's still challenging to figure out how to get the resources that you need. And if you don't, it's that much more. So I know that isn't very much of an answer, but I think it's true. I don't know, Virginia, what do you think?
It's pretty tough. People ask me all the time, and $7,000 a month is not unusual.
Mhm.
I was lucky in that my father, before he passed, had purchased long-term care insurance for my mother. And thank God, because, it was hovering around 7 grand just for the basics. Now, then you take into consideration that I didn't like their incontinence products, so I bought them all the time. Hair, they didn't have an accessible sink, so I had to arrange transportation with a wheelchair just to go get her hair done. Podiatrist, doctor's visits. There were months that hovered between 18 and 20,000 a month. And I do understand that there are not a lot of people out there who can even begin to think about something like that. In-home care is not inexpensive either. You can it can run thousands of dollars a month
Oh, yeah.
for in-home care,
Easily. Mhm.
Yeah.
right?
Now, where was your mom? Was she in assisted living or in skilled nursing?
She
That was
was
assisted living.
assisted living, and in the last couple of years, she ended down in memory care, which was the
Mhm.
lower locked up area. But it
Right.
was lovely. Now, it was not what I would call luxurious.
Mhm.
It was not. It was nice.
Mhm.
I had some problems with them, but I didn't complain much because they were working so hard.
Right.
But that was Mission Viejo. I know people right now who are utilizing what they call the residences. If someone will take their home and take in 5 people, to take care of. Those can work out rather well too,
Mhm.
because the percentage of the care is there's probably at least 2 caregivers for 5 residents, which is pretty good.
Yeah, that is good.
Mhm.
Now, my stepfather, he was in Massachusetts. He passed away 2018, and we were paying 12,000 a month for his nursing home. We weren't paying it because he was on Medicaid, but
Okay.
I had to go through the whole system of, coordinating that for them so that my mother would have been broke. She would have been like living on the street if she
Right.
had to pay for it.
Right.
So that was really rough.
It's rough.
And the care aides for my mom at the end were like $28 an hour. And I'm like, most people don't even earn $28 an hour. You got to pay
Yeah.
somebody $28 an hour so you can go to work. And what are you making? You got to be making a lot
That's
more.
interesting to me that you said that, and that's the East Coast. Okay, so we're not terribly dissimilar, are we?
No, it's outrageous. It's outrageous. So,
I think
Louis?
Luis has his hand up.
Oh yeah, I just have a comment to make. So I'm currently in Argentina,
mhm.
and that's something in terms of like cost, that's something that I've noticed where not here in Argentina, but at least when I was in Ecuador, there was a lot of people from the United States and some of those care facilities because the amount of money they would pay, it would basically last them longer to live in a care facility back in Ecuador. And here in Argentina, this one facility that I visited, they to just be part of that nursing home, all you have to pay is like $300 a month, US dollars. And here they don't use US dollars, they use their Argentinian pesos, they have their own currency. But it has been very interesting to see the divide of cost across different countries and US dollars and everything, because one thing that you see from here is that what you pay for an entire month in the United States for care to be in a nursing home, you could pay here in Latin America or here in Argentina for a couple of years. And that's just 1 month of being in a nursing home in America Versus here, if you're here, it's not going to last you for 2-3 years.
Louis, I have a question. This is Ethelle. Lord, do you find the family are following the patients, the residents? Are the family moving there? Or are they just leaving their loved one?
Depending where the facilities are, but yes, I definitely see that families are visiting some facilities. The more luxurious facilities, I would say, are more open and more flexible with families visiting anytime. But most of them do have strict schedules of when families could come visit. But families they tend to go and visit them once a week. If not, a lot of people tend to have phones, and they typically call their family members and whatnot. One thing I do notice here in Argentina is that the residents within these facilities, they are more, they know more of their rights. So they know that a caregiver or a nurse can't necessarily say X, Y, and Z to them, which has been very interesting because in Ecuador and Peru, I did not come across them really knowing some of their rights. They mostly were like, I'm just like getting the service that I get. Like as long as I'm being cared for, that's all I want. But here in Argentina, I definitely see that these facilities, people want more than just the basic care. They want more engagement from people.
So are their families moving to be next to them? Or are they staying in the United States?
So in terms of like, no, families from the United States are staying in the United States and then they come visit them. From what they tell me, yes. I thought you were referencing like whether or not the family members are staying and visiting them here. No, if they're from the United States, typically they just stay in the United States and then come once in a while to visit them. Yes.
Yes, I know people that would do that readily, would do that. Matter of fact, I know of a man that left his mother in a nursing home in the United States and said, don't call me until she's dead. So that kind of thinking I could see going to Argentina, but you know what? A person with dementia and memory loss need the family. They really have to stay close to them. And if they move back to the United States, they're not moving to Argentina for 10, 20 years, then I think it's a money deal. It's nothing else.
Yeah, that is horrifying. You know, you think about somebody, I mean, I would hope that people who were maybe going to like Argentina had some affiliation with Argentina in their life, because if not, now you're in a facility where they don't speak English and you're already confused. And so now you have people talking a foreign language, and that's even more. They must be heavily medicated to keep them calm, I would imagine.
Well, if that is as an indication of warehousing somebody, that's so awful.
Well, a lot of these places, especially in this country, are money makers anyway. You know, they're for profit. And that's what they're
It's a
looking
business.
for.
It's a business.
Business. Yeah, it is.
For profit, just like you and I we work for money, and we have to live. So it's a business. So my new plan, which I posted the link to, is going to involve professional, including family caregivers. Because if we don't start to understand that we have a big role to play and continue after the person is placed in long-term care, once we get too tired, well, a lot of people don't do that. They don't follow, and then they complain. I've taught at the university. I always told my students, if you come up with a problem, please come with a solution, because I won't listen to your question. So if we have a problem with long-term care, we are part of that problem. How are we going to fix it? So I think we need it. It's something we need for anybody who has dementia and memory loss. And so how are we going to contribute to help that institution, which has been struggling for centuries, abusive, neglectful, you name it? How can we change it? And I think we can. I do believe we can. I tested my model and it worked.
Okay, that sounds positive. A little bit of hope there. So I think we covered most of the topics that we wanted to explore today. Did anybody else have anything they wanted to ask? No? Okay. All right, so this was our first in this series, and I hope to continue in the future with representatives from other countries, because we are a global organization and we have authors living in Europe, South Africa, Australia, Israel, Canada, the UK, quite a bit. So we wanted to try to learn from each other. That's our goal.
Perfect. I can't wait
Yeah.
for the next time.
Yeah, well, we are going to do a different kind of a panel, and we're trying to do like them quarterly. So we have one coming up in November, which is National Caregiver Appreciation Month, and the topic for that one is dementia with difficult people. And that's going to have authors who have cared for a parent that they've had a turbulent relationship with, and then in the end ended up being a caregiver, or they have had siblings who were not helpful. So that ought to be an interesting discussion. We have a lot of the books in our collection come from that perspective. So I want to thank you for attending Dementia Care Around the World. And please check your inbox each week for news from AlzAuthors. You'll be added to our mailing list. And we introduce our new author a podcast every week. We have special events and many, many more things for you to uncover and to discover about Alzheimer's and dementia care. You can visit our blog and podcast and bookstore at alzauthors.com and follow us on social media. We're at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, you are not alone. One can sing a lonely song, but we chose to form a choir and create harmony. Thank you so much.